Hi, so welcome to our third day of talking about scale. First day we talked with Brenna and she showed us scale and what it meant to an architect. Yesterday you learned how to actually do it, and today we're going to talk about another way that scale is important, and it has to do with a hobby that my family shares. The trains that you're about to see are actually my trains, and the buildings are buildings that I made, but I'm going to introduce you to Mr. So this is Mr. Whitney. He is my husband, and he shares a love of trains with all of us. He's wearing his Boston and Maine shirt. So why is scale important to hobbyists who are interested in trains?
Well, if you want to build a model of a real train, you need to be able to build it to scale so that it makes sense. You can't build a real train because it's too big. You want to fit it in your house, you got to make it small. But you want to make it so that it looks right. You have to have a scale so that you can model what's real. The other reason you want scale is because if you want to go out and buy trains, they come in different scales, and you want them all to be the same scale on your layout.
Okay, so take a tour with us. Show us three of the more common scales.
So here's three example scales. The first one is O scale, also known as Lionel, and that means O scale means that it's 1 foot is equal to 43.5 feet. So if we took a ruler that was set out in O scale.
Is that like Brenna's scale that she used when she was showing architecture buildings?
Very, very similar, yes. So here's the O scale. This engine would be more than 46 feet. In fact, it's probably closer to 60 feet long if you in real life. Okay. Here it's only about 1.5 feet.
Okay, so is it proportional? So if it's however many feet you said in real life, would it be the proportional amount in height so it didn't look like a long, skinny, weird-looking thing?
Right, so all three dimensions have to be in scale. The length, the width, and the height all have to be in scale. Otherwise, it won't look right.
Okay, and looking right is important?
It is very important.
There's actually people, we call them rivet counters, and they have to make things look extremely right. Okay.
That's crazy. All right. So this next one is HO scale. 1 foot is equal to 87 feet. That's the scale. HO is considered or talked about as half O because it's about half the size. But remember, in scale, if it's 43 feet in O scale, it's about twice as much in HO scale.
So this engine would be about half the size of the other engine.
Yeah, half the length, half the width, and half the height.
Okay.
So this engine is about 56 feet long in real life.
Okay. And behind it is a little house. Notice it looks okay with the little house. And if we took the little house, which, oh, by the way, is HO proportions, if we took this house and stuck it next to that train, it wouldn't look right.
It would look silly.
It would look silly. Okay.
Something that surprises people when they see a steam engine next to a building is how big a steam engine looks. But in real life, steam engines are actually pretty big. They're actually pretty tall. So it actually makes sense.
How would you know that? Have you ever been in a steam engine?
Absolutely. I've actually driven a steam engine. 2 years ago, I was driving number 3025 down in Essex, Connecticut, which is a Mikado type engine. And I got to drive it for a whole hour. That was very exciting.
Someone must love you.
That was a present from my wife and her dad. The next train here is N scale, which is half again as small as HO scale. So the scale is 1 foot is equal to 160 feet. About twice what this one is. Now, in this case, this engine here, if you measured it in the right scale, is about 60 feet long. So this engine and this engine are almost the same length in real life, but you can see in between the scales, this is much smaller because N scale is smaller. And the building behind is also N scale. You can see the doors are smaller, the windows are smaller, but next to the building, the engine, goes about a story high. That's about right. The engine's about 10 feet high. So
and same with the HO scale.
Same with the HO scale.
And if I moved the house here and took my little hardware store and put it next to that it would look ridiculous.
Might
And
be cute, but not quite right.
same here is that would look absurd. Trains are much bigger than that would be.
Now, one of the tricks we use in modeling is actually kind of cool. So let's put this back here. In HO scale, if you're up close to something, you want the scale to be close. If you want to get the impression that something is further away than it really is, you can take an N scale building and move it back. And that gives the impression that it's much, much further away because it's that much smaller.
And it's actually called forced scale.
Forced scale or forced perspective. That's how we do. It's one of the other tricks that we do when we're modeling is it has to do with forced perspective. Is you can't really model exactly one-to-one everything that you would see in a real railroad. For example, a mile on a real railroad, 87 miles on a real railroad would be 1 mile of track in HO scale. If you're modeling 87 miles of railroad, that's not very big. But in a mile in the basement would be many, many times around. It's 5,280 feet of track. That's a lot. So we use a thing called selective compression, which means we take pieces of what we want to model and we stick it down on the layout, and then we put things like mountains and trees and stuff in between places to give the impression that you're actually going further than you really are. And that's also why scale is important, because you use your scale to figure out how many feet you really are modeling.
Cool. Thank you very much. So you remember Mr. Whitney saying that most people don't have one-to-one scale in their basement, meaning that they don't model big, huge trains, and that most people find that kind of impractical. And you remember, Brenna, from my lessons of a couple days ago when we talked about architecture. So, Brenna, tell my students what you do on the weekends for fun.
Oh, I work with big trains.
What do you do with big trains?
I'm training to be called a trainman, which is basically an assistant conductor. So my roles include everything to, if you ride and coach for the Conway State Railroad, I will probably be helping you get up onto the train and clipping your tickets, as well as doing what's called runaround maneuvers, which is when we take the engine from one end of the train and run it around the train and hook it up to the other end of the train. So I'm the person directing the engineer, because he can't see where we're going, to make sure he stops in the right, or starts and stops in the right places and stuff like that. I also perform brake tests, which are kind of nerve-wracking, but they're pretty interesting because you learn how the train actually functions. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I'm training to do now.
So if you go to Conway Scenic maybe this summer, Brenna tore her ACL, so she has to have surgery. So she may or may not be there all summer, but she certainly will be there. So if you go there, look her up. In fact, I'm going to include a video of her doing a runaround with the big train at Conway. So cool things.
You mentioned? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's a good one. She's priority.
Bye guys.